Well, thank you very much, John, and good evening, everyone. It really is an honour to be asked to give this lecture. And as a humble shopkeeper, it's rather daunting to look down the list of people who have given this lecture. You know, such eminent names as Tim Ambler, Paddy Barwise, Jeremy Bullmore, and Rory Sutherland. That is a tough group of people to follow. I do see, however, that my old friend Martin Glenn delivered a lecture in 2007, and it's up there, called They Think It's All Over. And as on our behalf, he is overseeing the fortunes of the England football team this evening, I'm hoping that by the end of 90 minutes, the Spanish do indeed conclude that it is all over. Well, what I want to do over the next 50 minutes is to try to bring to life some of the profound changes which are affecting the retail sector, and tease out what I believe to be some of the implications for brands and their owners. Now, as John was describing, I've spent nearly all of my career in the retail industry, and I can proudly look back on improving the lives of British consumers through innovative private label innovation, or perhaps not. I'm particularly upset that 30 years on, someone had the nerve to attempt to sell on eBay those stylish red oval hooks that I spent several months developing when I was at Do It All. Well, we're going to start by looking at the structural challenges that face retailers, consider what are the principal strategic responses to those challenges, and then conclude by setting out some of the things that I think we will see in the future. Now, this has been a tough year for British retail, with some extraordinarily high-profile issues, and a year where retailers can be forgiven for feeling that they are, rightly or wrongly, being blamed for the ills of society. But the truth of the matter is that in most retail boardrooms, boards are more focused on the long-term structural challenges which the industry faces. And the first of those is the relentless rise of limited assortment discounters. Now, we've been here before, of course. Back in the 1990s, we had the first wave of store building by Aldi, Lidl and Netto, and that didn't amount to very much. But I think the wake of the financial crisis in 2008 has prompted a lot of consumers to give these brands a try, and they like what they have seen. And in the last 2 years alone, the big four supermarkets have lost nearly 3 percentage points of market share, primarily to Aldi and Lidl. And this pattern of established mainstream retailers losing ground to discounters can be seen in most retail product sectors and in most geographies. But the discounters themselves are not standing still. So Poundland have moved away from their single price format at this new Poundland and More store which has just opened in Slough. And that's giving them the flexibility to move into different product categories like frozen foods. Across Europe, Aldi and Lidl are moving to larger store formats, wider ranges, better presentation. Now, those moves to broaden ranges have got to be good for FMCG manufacturers. But I do think it begs the question of whether it's going to start to blur the original basis of differentiation of those brands. However, if you look at markets like Germany and Scandinavia, highlighted in red on this slide, that case study suggests that here in the UK, where those discount retailers have just 9.6% of the market, that this is a story that is yet to run its course. The second structural change is, of course, e-commerce. Now, globally, it's up 20% this year, with the more mature regions still growing at a double-digit rate. 7% of all retail sales globally are made online. As a result, the value of sales through physical stores is in this country at best flat, with the consequent squeeze on profitability. And as you can see, China is now the largest e-commerce market in the world. But online does have that greater penetration in the UK than any other market. This data, which was 2013, it was 14%. Today, it's probably closer to 20%. There are many reasons for that leadership, including the fact that UK retailers were early adopters of digital technology, greater penetration of credit cards, you have to have a way to pay, and the crowded British high streets. In my view, pure play online channels are great news for brands that have high awareness. And of course, the elastic shelves that pure play online retailers have is also good news if you're a small emerging brand. Although the challenge is, how do you get discovered on those online platforms? Globally, I think we'll continue to see rapid growth in this channel. This chart shows all B2C sales, not just grocery, but nevertheless illustrates who the big players are. FMCG brands will need to develop strategies to seize the growth opportunities with these 10 organisations. Another challenge facing retailers is the emergence of the smartphone-wielding savvy consumer. And technology is driving change on 3 fronts. So working clockwise from top right, for centuries, retailers have been great early adopters of new technology. And the accelerating pace of change has brought about huge efficiency benefits across supply chain, store operations, and customer insight. Secondly, at the bottom, technology has facilitated disruptive new entrants in all sectors. This photograph is of a business called Arden Reed, which is a custom suit retailer in Manhattan. And these guys go around Manhattan in a van, which is equipped with a 3D body scanner, take your measurements there and then, come back 6 weeks later with the suit. Just to put a figure on the impact of disruptive competition, McKinsey estimate that the entry and growth of Walmart into the US forced the incumbent retailers to take 33% out of their cost base. The subsequent arrival of Amazon has forced those same retailers to take out a further 15%. And last but not least, online access has eliminated the constraint of geographical distance from consumers' options, and that gives them unrivaled choice and unrivaled bargaining power. Now, about half of UK online sales are now made on mobile devices, and within that, the proportion made on smartphones is growing much faster, with conversion now approaching 2%. This is what consumers are actually using their smartphones for in store. So they're comparing prices, they're looking at reviews and product information, and they're seeking advice from friends. Indeed, the smartphone is the ultimate informed, always available shopping companion. This not only increases price transparency, but for us retailers, it greatly increases the need for us to make sure that our staff really do understand what they're telling you about. So consumers are in a powerful position as retailers set out to provide reassurance about their price credentials. 2 years ago, Walmart introduced their Savings Catcher program, where if you scan in your receipt, Walmart will work out whether you could have got those goods more cheaply, and then they'll reimburse you accordingly. But of course, the digitally enabled consumer doesn't need Walmart to do that for them. They can do it themselves. And in most markets, there are very powerful online tools to help you do that. This is a fascinating chart. This is a site called CamelCamelCamel, which tracks price movements on Amazon over time. And these are the weeks up to and including the death of David Bowie, and looks at the price movements of a classic back catalogue album. The things that are interesting to me about this are, first of all, the sheer size of the price changes, the frequency of the price changes, and I have to admit that when I ran HMV, if an artist was unfortunate enough to die, we put all the prices up. The Amazon algorithm seems to do exactly the opposite and has reduced the prices. So bricks and mortar retailers are also having to contend with the focus, agility, and sheer investment of pure play competitors, most notably Amazon. And capital markets have continued to support this business and their relentless drive for growth, despite very meagre profits, clearly still believing 22 years on in Jeff Bezos' original napkin sketch that describes his twin flywheel business model. Now, Amazon is at the forefront of innovation, spending some 10% of its revenues on R&D, creating products like the Echo hands-free speaker that you can control with your voice to connect to the Alexa voice service to play music, give you information, news, and of course to help you shop with Amazon. On the right, traditional retailers are severely lagging the quantum of investment that's coming from the large pure-play competitors. And as a result, Amazon is relentlessly attacking new market sectors. So top right is fashion, where they screened their first TV ad in this country last month. At the bottom, they're rolling out their handmade offer, which features 30,000 products coming from over 1,000 artisan sellers. And that platform sells products like jewelry, furniture, and home decor. In the US, Amazon recently linked up with Wells Fargo to offer student loans. And of course, that's an opportunity to recruit at an early stage what will ultimately be an attractive young professional consumer. And they've launched a new platform to help consumers research and compare cars. Also in the US, you can use Amazon Home Services to clean your home, install air conditioning, or unblock your loo. And there is a low-key move into private label with Happy Belly coffee and Mama Bear organic baby food. And the latter I think is very interesting because we all know that baby food is one of the toughest categories for private label to penetrate. As ever, I think Amazon is trying to test the boundaries of what it can do. Outside of FMCG, Amazon has a more well-developed global private label strategy on things like linens and computer and mobile phone accessories. Now, Amazon Dash enables customers to hit a button to automatically replenish household consumables. Brands pay Amazon $15 for each button sold and 15% of each Dash product sale on top of the normal commission, which I understand typically ranges from 8 to 15%. And while it's obvious to me where you would put your Tide and Andrex buttons, I'm inviting responses afterwards as to where you put the Durex button. So Amazon bookstores opened in Seattle, Portland, and San Diego on the top right, and that prompted rumors of 400 stores in the US. I think that's way wide of the mark. But it is clear that Amazon is prepared to experiment with business models that will help them drive up membership of Prime, sell digital devices and services like Echo and Kindle, reduce the cost of physical delivery, such as in the campus pickup points, that one at the bottom left is at Purdue, or most significantly of all, promote the Amazon Fresh Grocery service. So the unit on the top left is currently under construction in Seattle and appears to be a convenience store which is going to combine a pickup point for Amazon Fresh orders with an opportunity to sell short life and impulse grocery goods. Now, they're going to do a trial of 20 of these stores, and I understand that half of them are going to be largely focusing on click and collect, and the other half will be a fuller proposition convenience store. Amazon Prime Now is a 2-hour US delivery service, which already accounts for 20% of Amazon Prime business. To me, the strategic implication is the further erosion of one of bricks and mortar's remaining sources of competitive advantage, and that is immediate on-site availability. Indeed, if I was a brand owner, I would worry about the implications of a reduced frequency of visit to physical stores and what that might mean for impacting impulse sales. Amazon have recruited self-employed delivery drivers through their Flex program, and that's just one of a number of supply chain innovations to both provide a higher level of service and reduce costs. They've just started a program to lease 40 cargo jets in an effort to speed up deliveries and reduce their reliance on UPS and FedEx. Now, despite these experiments, you could easily conclude that pure-play retailers like Amazon must have an advantage in not having to own a lot of real estate. But that's only partly true. Last year in America, Amazon opened over 5 million square feet of warehousing space. This centre in Baltimore is 1 million square feet and employs 2,500 people. But they've also been opening smaller local fulfillment centres. And staggeringly, 44% of the US population now live within 20 miles of an Amazon fulfillment centre. So what they're now doing is getting predictive analytics to put into those local fulfillment centres what you are going to buy before you even know that you want to buy it. All of this is very costly. As you can see from the top graphic, the majority of Amazon.com's operating profit now comes from revenue streams that have nothing to do with retailing. And in the bottom graphic, Amazon fails to recoup its shipping costs, which are the red bars, through its shipping revenues, which are the turquoise arrows, despite the benefit of all those Prime subscriptions. But of course, Prime is a very potent tool for locking consumers in. Some 60% of American and 36% of British households are Prime members. And staggeringly, when you become a Prime member, you are likely to increase your spend with Amazon by a factor of 2.5 times. And consumers in the US are no longer automatically turning to search engines to research products. 55% of Americans automatically turn to Amazon, and that's up from 44% last year. And Prime is tough to compete against. ShopRunner is a US multi-party competitor. It offers deliveries from 150 different retailers, and it's valued at $500 million after investment from Alibaba last year. But it currently has just 1/7 of the membership level of Prime. UBS estimate that Amazon in this country took a quarter of all UK non-food sales growth and now represent 20% of UK general merchandise sales. In this chart conceptualizes the exposure that each listed retailer has to Amazon. So the size of each bubble reflects the current proportion of that retailer's sales made online. The x-axis reflects the degree of range overlap with Amazon, and the y-axis, the degree to which that retailer's range is differentiated. So those who are most exposed, and I used to work for WH Smith, are towards the bottom right of this chart. So, with such far-reaching threats, what are retailers' principal strategic responses? Well, obviously, if e-commerce is growing at double-digit, it would be a good idea for physical retailers to get into that, and they are doing that in their droves with multi-channel propositions. Some commentators continue to oversimplify and describe sales as either being made in store or online, but we know that the reality is much more complex than that, particularly for large ticket purchases, with, as shown by the left-hand graphic, about 3/4 of major purchases actually using both channels. So the right-hand chart is a fantastically complex model developed by Forrester to try to explain how consumers make their decisions, using the various sources which are color-coded along the bottom. In the great tradition of consultancy models, it really forces you to have to go to Forrester to explain it. But in this transitional phase, many retailers are still struggling to reliably attribute the relative importance of these various influences. And despite the focus and agility of pure-play retailers, actually, physical retailers who are multi-channel have been closing the performance gap. So this shows consumer perceptions of John Lewis in green against Amazon in blue. And you can see that over a 4-year period, the gap is narrowed. There is still a gap in relation to perception of prices and width of range, but John Lewis's leadership in its traditional strengths of quality, service, and trust have widened. But multi-channel is costly, particularly in terms of finding a viable way of getting the delivery to you in a way which makes economic sense. Now, unsurprisingly, retailers have tried very hard to persuade us to pick up the deliveries from click and collect stores or collection lockers. But that isn't cost-free either, and that's why Tesco and John Lewis have introduced surcharge on lower transactions, and others will follow. The other ideas that people are playing with from the top left include a Volvo app, which grants the retailer a one-time electronic key to open the boot of your car so that the shop assistant can put the purchases in your boot, perhaps removing other things in the process, and sending you a text message to say that they've done that. Top right, Swedish grocer ICA has collaborated with a startup called Glue, which goes further and offers electronic access to your home. If you live in Greenwich, you will have seen these things trundling around the street, bottom right. That is a ground drone. It travels at 4 miles an hour and has a 3-mile radius of the store. And best of all, this is very James Bond. The bottom left is a Mercedes electric van where the data center inside tells the van where to stop. The drone then goes down into the van and selects the right package and flies out of the roof to deliver it to your doorstep. What is clear is the economic impact that the move to multi-channel is having on physical stores. So the top chart shows Deloitte's projection that the proportion of American sales influenced by digital will rise from about 2/3 today to 95% in 5 years. And that's going to lead to the inevitable squeeze on store economics shown by the McKinsey analysis on the bottom, where even after further operational cost savings, the return on invested capital is set to fall by 500 basis points. So I'm afraid that means that most retailers have too many stores. Here is an analysis of the number of store closures that would be required among US department stores to get the sales densities back to where they were 10 years ago. Indeed, most established retailers have not just too many stores, but too many large stores. This is an interesting example of how Sainsbury's have reconfigured one of their very biggest stores, the 61,000 square foot store in Elms, which opened 30 years ago. They've just done this, and not only is there a greatly enhanced fresh food offer, but they've given more space to the Tew clothing range and substantial amounts of space to the recently acquired Argos business, together with its Habitat brand and eBay collection point. Now, I think for FMCG brands, there are great opportunities that arise from the fact that most retailers are seeing their sales densities in non-food drop more rapidly than in food. Another response to sluggish domestic performance is to go to faster-growing international markets. And Primark has really not put a foot wrong internationally. It now has 45% of its space in 8 markets outside its original Ireland and UK base. So from top left is Madrid, where they have 41 stores in Spain, Boston, the first in the US, Dusseldorf and Paris. But for most retailers who've set out to internationalize, it has been far from plain sailing. Just last week, Marks & Spencer's announced the closure of 53 stores in 10 international markets. And multi-brand retailers like groceries and home improvement retailers, frankly, have had as many failures as they have had successes when trying to internationalize. And the hypermarket has not proved to be the killer format in emerging economies, which many had hoped. The most famous internationalization debacle of all was Tesco in the US, who lost more than £1 million on this disastrous fresh and easy venture. Now, they did a lot of market research. We know that Tesco have highly capable management, yet they still got a lot of this execution horribly, horribly wrong. Perhaps trying to impose ideas which they saw as being superior about the typical UK shopping experience. But you know what? American consumers prefer what they already knew. So they didn't like automated checkouts, didn't like pre-packed fruit and vegetables, thought there was far too much private label, 50% against the US norm of 20%. There weren't enough large pack sizes. The portion sizes were too small, surprise, surprise, and too many ready meals. Another response that retailers have made is to sell services rather than goods. So in their latest results, Pets at Home disclosed that like-for-like growth of 2.2% on merchandise, but 7.5% on services. And I think we can all guess that the margins are likely to be higher on veterinary services and pet grooming than they are on selling bags of pet food. Now, arguably, this margin-driven move towards services also chimes perhaps with a changing consumer sentiment towards outright ownership of goods and the throwaway culture that pervaded much of the last decade. Indeed, Patagonia, which is the environmentally conscious outdoor clothing brand, takes this to a natural conclusion. So rather than trying to sell you a new coat, they try to encourage you to repair the one you've already got, and if you can't repair it, then they'll repair it for you. And a further trend is to personalise propositions to better meet the needs of individual customers. And these can leverage technologies which recognise you, perhaps by using your mobile phone, as in the image at the top. Many retailers like Target are now using data analysis to provide personalised offers, and I think the best company at doing this in the UK is Shop Direct, the old Littlewoods business that trades under the Very name. Their data scientists have developed an in-house algorithm that produces 200 million different promotion affinity scores and ranks the relevance of the offers for each customer, thereby generating 1.2 million individual versions of the homepage. They know where you are, they know who you are, and you therefore get a personalised proposition. Tesco have also announced a tie-up with this startup called If This Then That. And if you give it permission, what this software will do is it will pull together all the information from the various apps on your smartphone to develop personalised recommendations to you about what you should buy at Tesco. And, you know, the optimist would think that this might unlock a lot of latent demand for brands. Now, this vendor is helping retailers better understand the shoppers in their stores with technology that analyses your footwear, and therefore can make apparently reliable assumptions about gender, demographic, and social class, and avoiding the privacy concerns that come from facial recognition. However, I do think that a certain comparison website advertising icon might confuse it. Retailers are also innovating across a number of fronts. So the recent focus of grocery openings has been convenience formats, driven by smaller household sizes and multiple job holders per household. But that's now spreading to other sectors of retailing. So top right is Whiskers and Paul's, which is Pets at Home's small format store in Dorking. Bottom right is Topps Tiles, and carpet right is Clapham. I knew that if I'd stayed long enough when I was at Summerfield, all of those small stores would have been an advantage in the end. In August, IKEA opened its third order and collection point in Birmingham. Now, this doesn't carry anything like the full range, and it primarily acts as a studio to plan purchases such as kitchens, wardrobes, and sofas. It has a number of room sets, and it's got a bistro where, of course, you can buy the infamous meatballs. Dutch supermarket Jumbo has opened this virtual shop, temporarily transforming a bus shelter in Utrecht, and customers can scan the images and add them to their virtual shopping cart using a smartphone app. And perhaps noting the relative success of multi-channel retailers, some pure plays are experimenting themselves with physical stores. So top left is Warby Parker, which is a great online eyewear retailer in New York. Top right is the Amazon bookstore we've talked about earlier. And at the bottom, Made.com and Misguided are really learning more about customers through having physical stores. Retailers do continue to use new technologies to innovate. So self-scan checkouts have really sped up consumer experience and reduced retailers' costs. But at the top, Kaufland have now introduced an app for consumers to scan their own purchases. And companies like QHOP are going even further and eliminating the checkout altogether, using a combination of RFID chip-enabled shopping bags and smartphone apps. It simply checks you out as you put things in the bag. Robots are also being used. So top left, Lowe's have introduced customer service robots into 11 stores in California. And they believe that by asking the robot a question along the same lines of what you would put into a retailer's website search box, actually that's going to make the two types of shopping trip more comparable and convenient. Meanwhile, Tesco is investing in robots to replenish clothing in their stores using RFID chip-enabled robots. And at the bottom, Darty has developed this rather strange-looking humanoid robot called Neo into its sales team to try and sell you a television. And if you were a Darty shop assistant, you probably don't need to fear for your job just yet, because apparently it takes 3 operatives to operate each robot. Virtual reality is now being used by IKEA so that you can try out a new kitchen before you buy it. You can change the color of the kitchen cabinets, you can change the configuration, you can walk around the area, you can even shrink yourself down to the size of your children to assess the safety implications of the kitchen. And musical instrument retailer Gear for Music equips its sales staff with internet-enabled glasses so that they can show you the guitar and talk you through it whilst you're sitting at home. Similarly, Westfield Shopping Centre in West London has designed this augmented reality mirror, which actually sits in each hotel room in the Sanderson Hotel. So you can sit in your hotel room, you can shop for luxury goods, there's a personal stylist on the other end in Westfield, and the goods will be with you in 90 minutes. Woolworths Australia have linked up with Samsung, who market a fridge which has got a door-mounted camera. And this is a logical progression towards programmatic commerce, where smart devices are going to be able to make automatic purchases on behalf of consumers according to preset parameters. Now that's got great advantages in terms of bringing new levels of convenience and cost saving. And if you want to know more about this, there is a fantastic article in the latest edition of Market Leader that talks about this. But I do worry that this might change the dynamics of brand choice as consumers no longer make an active decision. So if at one moment in time you concluded that you wanted a certain brand of yogurt, the likelihood your fridge is going to keep on ordering that for you until you tell it otherwise. There's already 5 billion of these devices, and by 2020, Cisco estimate there will be 26 billion connected devices. Unsurprisingly, retailers are looking at how they can use private label to offset their structural challenges. Private label market share grew in 13 out of the 20 European countries tracked by Nielsen last year. And perhaps the most notorious example is Tesco's Farm range. 7 new entry-level brands designed to be price competitive with Aldi and Lidl, and I think in a rather misleading way suggest British rural origins. However, despite widespread criticism, these brands have landed up in over a quarter of Tesco's shopping baskets. And Tesco is set to make further major changes to the appearance of their stores in so-called Project Reset, which is going to put more prominence on private label products, which will increase in space allocation by as much as 14%. Now that's going to obviously raise the stakes in terms of getting continuant brand presence on the shelf. But if you've got a really powerful brand, I think it could be an opportunity for you as secondary and tertiary brands are delisted. Carrefour in France has introduced a new milk brand called Who is the Owner, of which consumers choose what the price will be. And there are 95 milk producers in Normandy who will receive a premium as a result. H-E-B, which is a grocer in Texas, is rolling out a new private label line that excludes more than 200 synthetic ingredients like high fructose corn syrup and artificial flavors. Now, I think more retailers will try and seize the ethical, nutritional high ground through private label innovation. So they're throwing down the gauntlet to see if brand manufacturers are going to be slower off the mark in addressing those concerns. Non-food retailers are also focusing on product innovation. 50 people work for Kingfisher in their innovation centre in Lille. The lamp in the middle is made of silicone and can be moulded into different shapes and folds flat. The hammer has a magnetised groove on top to hold the nail, no more bruised thumbs. The pre-assembled panels in the shed mean it can be put up in 60 minutes. The power tool has a built-in torch, and my favourite, the barbecue has ceramic grills that you simply take out and put in the dishwasher. But I think some FMCG brands are thinking, well, maybe they can get their own back on retailers. And Magnum saw an opportunity for customers to engage more meaningfully with their brand through personalisation and experimentation in their pleasure stores, where customers have been sharing snaps of chocolate-laden creations. In New York, Kellogg's is reinforcing its indulgence brand positioning with charging $10 for a cereal serving, but bringing back that cereal box toy that we all remember from our childhood, but in the rather more grown-up form of giving you a concert ticket or an Uber gift card. Meanwhile, in Denmark, the DLF, which is the local equivalent of the British Brands Group, have launched Shobo, which is an e-commerce platform, and that's been supported by more than 70 FMCG brands. Now, my personal view is I'm a bit sceptical about some of these initiatives. They seem quite peripheral compared with the mainstream. And when I worked in bookselling, publishers tried to move downstream into bookselling, and they were completely crap at it. Just as bad as we were when we tried to move upstream into commissioning books and publishing them. The final area of innovation I want to cover is promotions. Now, perhaps the most noteworthy innovation in this country during the last year has been Waitrose giving consumers the option to choose 10 items from a list of about 1,000 to receive a 20% discount. I know antitrust and consumer protection regulators often worry about loyalty schemes, and even more controversial is a multi-tiered program, such as this one run by a business called Dorothy Lane Market, which is an upscale grocer in Ohio. And what they do is to effectively introduce a form of customer-specific pricing, where there are a number of distinct groups of customers in that club. And the majority of all discounts available in that store now only go to the identified top 30% of shoppers. In California, Safeway are using a very similar mechanism for their loyalty card customers. And most physical retailers at the moment stick to uniform pricing regardless of the identity of the customer. But potentially, electronic shelf-edge labels could recognize you through your mobile phone if you give it permission, and you could be charged a personalised price. Now, as a veteran retailer, that sounds like the holy grail of retail marketing. But I must say, I think regulators will worry about the plight of a relatively unwanted, disadvantaged group of customers. Here at Leclerc, they're using shelf-edge labels to embed local competitors' pricing in a rolling comparison, which you can see in the 3 images along the bottom of the screen. So what might the future hold? Well, firstly, I believe there is a tendency for many digital markets to exhibit extreme levels of concentration. So ultimately, this might be a winner-takes-all game. 4 companies, Amazon, Apple, Walmart, and rather surprisingly Staples, account for 40% of all American e-commerce. And 50 firms account for 3/4 of the market. And this is a market which is trending towards further concentration. And scale continues to be critical in e-commerce. So even such a high-profile new entrant as Jet.com said that it needed 15 million paying customers and $20 billion in revenues to break even, which it had hoped to do by 2020. It started off with $225 million of funding. Within a year, it had had to raise a further $550 million, and no surprise that it sold out to Walmart. They are indeed the 50 cent of e-commerce, get rich or die trying. This was never a viable business with an outrageous rate of cash burn. How many of you can spend $25 million a month on advertising? What persuaded Walmart to buy it? Well, I think Jet's key capability is a dynamic pricing algorithm which optimizes warehousing and shipping costs to maximize margins. So those of you who deal with Walmart in the US can expect to see some of that new insight reverberating back up the supply chain soon. In the face of such dramatic industry change, it also wouldn't surprise me to see more consolidation along the lines of the Ahold Delhaize merger, where there's a targeted 500 million euros of synergies over the next 3 years. Now, about 25 to 30% of that will come through cutting costs, but you won't be surprised who's going to pick up the bill for the other 65 to 70% of synergies. It's going to come from more efficient buying in brands and own label. And indeed, both parties employed consultants prior to completing the deal to create so-called playbooks, which on a line-by-line basis compared the buying terms for each of the two chains, with an aim of, at the very least, harmonising to the better of the two terms. No surprise, therefore, that this new organisation is to try to stress the benefits to suppliers of having 6,500 stores and nearly €2 billion in annual e-commerce revenues. Short of full mergers, we may well see more buying alliances despite the scrutiny of antitrust regulators. So during 2014, 6 of the top 8 grocery retailers in France formed 3 buying alliances, and that led to a substantial increase in buying power. And more recently, Leclerc have tied up with German retailer Rewe. And that's now spreading to non-food. So Conforama and Casino are to create a joint central purchasing agency to buy white and brown goods from international suppliers. Similarly, Auchan is strengthening its French general merchandise offer through a buying partnership with Boulanger. I always thought that was a baker and I'd got it wrong, but it's in fact a consumer electronics retailer. Now, the role of social media in shopping, I think, is still unclear. It's not just the huge number of customers, it's the relative stickiness of these sites which might give them a route into shopping. WhatsApp users spend 8 hours a month on the site, Facebook users 14. But the case isn't yet proven. Social media site owners would love to monetize that huge customer base, but are reluctant to undermine the relaxed, non-commercial dynamic of the site. And you can also see from the research at the top that consumers are also a bit lukewarm about that commercialization. Nevertheless, Instagram are testing a new feature in the US where brands can tag products. So once the tag is selected, a more detailed view of the product will open up, which allows customers to access information without having to leave the Instagram site. If they do want to buy, they can click a Shop Now button, which takes them directly to the product page on the retailer's website. It's Snapchat on the right. A lot of the conversations are currently about shopping, 2 faintly amusing examples here. And again, the site is about to roll out its own e-commerce platform in an attempt to monetize that trend. US mobile shopping startup Spring uses artificial intelligence to replicate the sort of conversation you might have with an informed, fashionable friend. In April, Facebook announced that it's opening up Messenger so that third parties can create so-called chatbots to act in this way. Now, Messenger has 900 million users, and there are 15 million businesses with an official Facebook page. So I think the scale of the opportunity is very clear. 22% of the global population use messaging services. But of course, the use of these artificial intelligence chatbots is going to take their owners head-to-head against Apple's Siri, Microsoft's Cortana, and Amazon's Alexa. At the top here, Amazon Marketplace, which is in red, grew by 53% last year, and on a gross merchandise value basis, it's already nearly double the size of its own direct-to-consumer business in the US. Like all marketplaces, there are issues with counterfeit brands, and Amazon sellers are now having to pay $1,000 or more to get prior approval before they're allowed to go onto the site in an effort to try and force off the people who sell counterfeit goods. By 2018, more than half of e-commerce growth will be driven by marketplaces. In China, Alibaba's Tmall, shown here, and JD.com have nearly 90% of the e-commerce market. Around 2/3 of Chinese urban consumers have a smartphone, and most of those are 4G enabled, and 56% of e-commerce takes place on mobiles. So this is a country that has completely leapfrogged the desktop. B2C e-commerce sales are growing at 27% per annum, and what these Chinese marketplaces are now doing is targeting the rural regions of the country. And that's a population with a particular appetite for international branded goods, not least because of the enormous number of food safety scandals in the country. And that's going to come in tandem with the rollout of the coastal free trade zones, which are designed to facilitate easier access to the market. So it's no wonder that retailers are looking at whether there are opportunities there. More than 100 Sainsbury's private label brands are now available on Tmall, and Costco achieved $3.5 million of sales in 24 hours when it held a so-called super brand day. JD.com is a really interesting business, not just because it's the number 2, it is still gigantic. Net revenues of $10 billion. It's got a partnership with Tencent that gives it access to the 1 billion people in China who use the WeChat and QQ mobile apps. It's got the biggest logistics coverage of any Chinese pure play, 234 warehouses and 7,000 pickup stations. And here's the really strategically important point. Walmart has just increased its stake in this business from 6% to 11%. Walmart itself is on track to open 115 stores in China. But by using JD.com's nationwide logistics network, Walmart can now reach 90% of Chinese consumers, and it can import goods directly without needing to use the free trade zones. So that's got huge implications for the size and depth of assortment that Walmart can offer to its customers. It's also made a $50 million investment in a logistics business that, as part of the deal, allows Walmart to begin a 2-hour grocery delivery service from an initial 20 hypermarkets. So to conclude, do I believe that there is any future for physical stores? Well, absolutely. But the role, I think, will focus on convenience, including allowing us to click and collect, providing information, as shown by the Genius Bar and Apple stores, community involvement, as at Lululemon Athletica, and bottom left, pure theatre like Italy. Brands have a role to play in helping retailers create those experiences. Although on the very right is US sports retailer REI, and yes, that is a real person on that in-store climbing wall. Can you imagine getting that through a British health and safety inspector? So is retailing still a good business to be in? Well, my friends at OC&C have argued that the most lucrative part of the value chain is going to move again. So if you go back to the 1970s, they argue the thing to be was to be a manufacturer. That was the most profitable part of the value chain. That, they would argue, has moved so that today the most profitable place to be is allegedly a retailer. And in the future, they hypothesize that the greatest rewards are either going to go to those people who own real upstream IP and innovation, or those downstream people who act as an intermediary between retailers and consumers. So if that's true, perhaps the only way for me to close this presentation is to share with you how my old adversaries at Tower Records marked the closure of their flagship store in Hollywood. And as all of us musos do in those times, you reach out for inspiration from the REM back catalogue. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me, and now it's time for questions.